From the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee, I'm Charles Purcell. This is The Log. Joe Biden. Let's try to figure this guy out. We on the left, that is, have been really harsh all through the campaign. We've been very demanding. And to our great surprise, for the most part, he is conducting himself in a big, bold, lefty, FDR kind of manner that none of us expected. We all kind of hoped for it. And yes, he's dropped the ball a couple times so far on student debt, on $15 minimum wage. But there's no getting around it. Bernie and the left wing of the Democratic Party are really finding just great success with this guy. So the whole Charlie Brown and the football thing, I feel like I'm a sucker to get a little excited, but how can you not get excited? We'll talk about the infrastructure bill in a minute, but right now I bring it up because I did see an opinion piece on truthout.org that I thought was worth mentioning. Headline, Biden's promise of U.S. leadership in quotes, in Central America has an ominous ring. So, yeah, you really got to keep an eye on the lefty press, because they're keeping us honest here, and they're keeping us from falling into this Charlie Brown football trap. Let me read just a little bit of this to you. Aviva Chomsky is the author of this piece. If you don't know Aviva Chomsky, she is the daughter of Noam Chomsky, historian, author, activist, academic. So that's great. Noam Chomsky, I don't know how old he is these days, but he's really getting up there. It's great that he has a daughter following in his footsteps. Anyway, let me read just a little bit of this. Joe Biden entered the White House with some contradictory positions on immigration in Central America. He promised to reverse Donald Trump's draconian anti-immigrant policies, while through his plan to build security and prosperity in partnership with the people of Central America, restoring U.S. leadership in the region that he claimed Trump had abandoned. For Central Americans, though, such leadership has an ominous ring. Although the second half of his plan's name does in fact echo that of left-wing grassroots organizations like the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador, its content highlights a version of security and prosperity in that region that's more Cold War-like than CISPES-like. CISPE is the acronym for, again, Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. Instead of solidarity or even partnership with Central America, Biden's plan actually promotes an old economic development model that has long benefited U.S. corporations. It also aims to impose a distinctly militarized version of security on the people of that region. In addition, it focuses on enlisting Central American governments, and in particular their militaries, to contain migration through the use of repression. So this is a worthwhile opinion piece. It's lengthy. You know what? I'll link this to the Facebook page today. Originally posted on Tom Dispatch, but I'll be sharing the link from truthout.org, again, the author, Aviva Chomsky. Yeah, this is an area where we really can and should try to hold our enthusiasm and keep Joe honest. He's never been a lefty. He's always been a moderate. And when it comes to foreign policy generally and Central American policy, which now is even more in the spotlight because of the southern border and the what appears to be record-breaking numbers of crossings, especially when it comes to unaccompanied minors. So this is all back in the news, and it's very appropriate to take a look at this policy. There's certainly no question the United States has a long history of usurping democratically elected left-wing governments in Central America, use of CIA, use of military, always very American corporate friendly. So a record is not good. And the results have not been good. Central America has these long-standing problems: political and military oppression, violence, course, the drug trade right at the center of all of this. And this business of America being this great force of peace and prosperity around the world, there's no more glaring example than Central America on how that's pretty much a joke. So as bold as Joe Biden has been, relatively speaking, regarding the current infrastructure bill and economics generally, he wants to raise taxes on the rich. All of this is great. We're all happy. But this is certainly worth keeping an eye on. Anyway, thank you, Aviva Chomsky, and I will share this article on the Facebook page. All right. Andrew Cuomo was in the news for like a week, and then everybody just forgot about him. So I guess his strategy worked. He seemed to have the idea that when it all hit the fan a week or two ago regarding his sexual harassment and inappropriate activity with women and downright assault in some cases, he just really hung tough, and I think counted on the idea that, this will go away. And as you and I talk about all the time, if it's not on the front page, it's just not happening. People have short memories, and that's what he was banking on. And then in the most fortunate timing here, he signs the bill to legalize recreational marijuana in New York. See, that's the thing with these Democrats, with the liberals. They can be personally just the worst. They can be total corporate sellouts. But they're Democrats, they're capital L liberals, so once in a while they do something really great, like legalizing recreational marijuana in New York. Last week, signed a bill legalizing recreational marijuana for all adults over the age of 21. This is Axios reporting now. The measure will also expunge records for thousands of people with past marijuana-related convictions. People of color represented 94% of marijuana arrests in New York City in 2020. So this is just great news. It's exactly what needs to happen, and it is happening. How many states is it now? Is it like 20? Something like that. About 46% of revenue from pot sales will be steered toward Latino and Black communities, according to the New York Times. Now, if you're thinking that he did this just to get out of his little jam, no, this has been in the works for quite a long time. It's gone through the New York State Legislature. It just came to his desk for a signature. And it just worked out this way. He just, that's the other thing with guys like this. Luck often plays into their success. And here's a case where he just fell into some lucky timing. New Yorkers will be allowed to smoke marijuana in any public place that tobacco smoking is permitted, but not in schools, workplaces, or cars. Local ordinances may apply different rules. Residents will also eventually be allowed to have small amounts of their own marijuana plants at home and get weed delivered to their doorstep. Yeah, that's the thing with all these marijuana laws. They're different in every city and state. They have different provisions, but I love that records are being expunged here. That's important. That should be happening everywhere. I've been saying for years that pot is going to go the way of same-sex marriage. It's going to be fits and starts in this state here and this city there and that state there, and then all of a sudden, boom, overnight, it's everywhere. Now, in the case of same-sex marriage, it happened because of a Supreme Court ruling. I'm not sure what the process here is ahead for medical and recreational marijuana. It's just a matter of time. I don't know how you stop this train. So sooner rather than later, it's going to be every state. And come on, let's go. And one of the reasons, too, is because politically, it's not really a right-left issue. People on the right, especially the libertarian crowd, they're very much for it, as opposed to the very loud sort of evangelical types and the moralists who, everything is evil. There's still a contingency, a sizable contingency there. But the libertarians are the ones who've really taken over the Republican Party. And so it certainly works into their philosophy. So there's the good news if you're looking for good news, and aren't we all? Pot will soon be legal, and at some point, I forget who to give credit to. One of my social media friends quoted either themselves or somebody else that we really will have arrived when weed is thought of just like wine. You know, wine, weed, everybody has pretty much the same attitude. And that's right. And that includes me. I'll have the same attitude. As much as an advocate as I am for legal weed, I never partake. I don't really have any use for it, just like I don't have any use for wine. I don't care for it. I don't like the pretentiousness of knowing which wine goes, all this pairing crap. And well, weed is very much that way too, all these different strains, and it becomes a lifestyle. And if that's your thing, okay, it's not hurting anybody. And I feel the exact same way about weed. I have no use for it. I think it's all kind of silly, if you want to be honest. But I'm very much in favor of legalization, absolutely. So there's some good news from New York. And again, just the next of many states, and soon to be all states. Can't happen soon enough for me. And as it relates to our carceral state, our criminal injustice system, and especially the horribly unfair racial components, disparities, yeah, nothing but good news here. Nothing but good news as pot becomes socially and legally accepted. Well, let's get back to Joe Biden for a second. I did mention the infrastructure bill just in passing. And I got to correct myself because it's not the infrastructure bill. That's one of the problems in the current press coverage. They're calling it the American Jobs Act, the American Jobs Plan. And one of the big criticisms coming from Republicans is that it's not about infrastructure. They give this ridiculous... They're doing exactly what they did with the COVID bill. Only 5% of it deals with COVID, which of course was ridiculous. Well, they're doing the exact same thing, same playbook. Only 5% is actual infrastructure. All right, so if you hear that argument, it's just a joke, as everything that comes out of a Republican's mouth these days. It's just not true. There are two kinds of infrastructure. There's physical infrastructure and there's social infrastructure. So physical is exactly what you think about. It's transportation, it's the power grid, sewer and waste systems, roads and bridges. The Republicans, they just want to define infrastructure in the most narrow terms. Roads and bridges, that's all they got, roads and bridges. But of course, it's so much more than that. And that's just physical infrastructure. But there's also social infrastructure, and that can be defined rather widely. It's not playing any games. It's a perfectly appropriate way to think about infrastructure. Anything that improves the quality of human life or stimulates the economy. Literacy programs, education, public health, housing, drinking water, sanitation. Infrastructure is a general term. It's not a specific little term. So the Republicans are just playing their game. By the way, I got to say, Pete Buttigieg, Transportation Secretary, Mayor Pete, former presidential candidate, I can't blame you if you're a little cynical about his cabinet appointment. Well, he was a presidential candidate. He was an early supporter of Joe Biden. He dropped out of the race and gave him his full support. That was, he deserved some political payback, so you might get cynical. But man, this guy, have you heard him out on the stump? In his role as Transportation Secretary and in his role as Biden's surrogate out pushing for this legislation, he's given interviews to every outlet you can imagine. He's on the Sunday shows. He's on NPR. You can't miss him. And he is the best spokesperson I've heard in a long, long time. This guy is getting it done. He'll take any question. He answers directly. He answers well. He gets to the point. He's extremely articulate, and he is just silencing the criticism. And I can't imagine a better spokesperson. This guy is very impressive. I got to hand it to Mayor Pete. So here again, as lefties, we got to hand it to Joe. Strictly just as policy, This country absolutely needs a huge shot in the arm when it comes to infrastructure, both physical and social infrastructure. I mean, an area that's been ignored for decades. They're comparing this to Eisenhower's Interstate Highway and Defense Initiative. They're comparing it to Lyndon Johnson's sweeping legislation regarding the war on poverty. Now, there's mixed success there, I'll be the first to admit. But just on sheer ambition, you can absolutely put this proposed legislation right up there with FDR and with Eisenhower's highways. In addition to the traditional roads and bridges, it tackles healthcare, childcare, closes tax loopholes for the rich and for corporations, raises the corporate tax rate. It was 35%. The Orange Menace dropped it to 21. This raises it back up to 28. So not even going back to the full 35. But this proposal takes it back up to 28%. Raises taxes, yes, but only if you make $400,000 or more. Do you make $400,000 a year? If you do, you can afford to pay a little more in taxes. If you don't, you got nothing to worry about. Now, the political side of this thing, also, we got to hand it to Joe. Once again, he has seen with a very clear eye that the Republicans aren't going to go with him on anything. There is no hope. Yeah, they're trying to float this idea. Well, just make it roads and bridges. Make it just traditional infrastructure the way we think about it, and we'll work with you. Well, first of all, they won't. But even if they did, let's imagine best case scenario. Well, best case, no. Maybe worst case scenario. That Joe fell for that little trick. Okay, we'll make a separate bill, just traditional infrastructure, roads and bridges. You know damn well the Republicans would continue to fight him. You know they would. It would be like pulling teeth to get a single Republican vote. So, not to overuse the little metaphor here, but it's Charlie Brown and the football all over again, over and over again. But imagine worst case scenario where they actually were able to negotiate with Joe, and Joe was stupid enough to do it, and they watered this thing down to just some tepid little couple of $1 billion infrastructure, roads and bridges, and passed it with bipartisan support. What good does that do anybody? It gets us a few roads and bridges. But then all of the other issues that still need addressing would still require that same fight, that same partisan BS, that zero Republican votes. You got to go through reconciliation, or you got to, finally do something about the filibuster. That same fight doesn't go away. There it is. So politically speaking, again, we got to hand it to Joe. He's learned the lesson. God bless him. This was Barack Obama's Achilles heel. For 6 years, he tried to work with these people, with these Republicans. And Joe has finally seen the light. It's like, you don't want to go along with this? Fine. Then just don't. We'll do it on our own. We'll do it through reconciliation. Any deal making we have to do, we'll do with Joe Manchin. He's basically the opposition party now. We have an opposition party of one single human being, or maybe two if you want to include Kyrsten Sinema. So that's the extent of negotiations, from Bernie on the left to Joe Manchin on the right, and Joe is very happy to work within those confines. And to look Mitch McConnell right in the eye and say, screw you, man. Fine, you don't want to play? All right, go sit in the back row and throw spitballs. We'll do the real work up here. That's what the Republicans have become. They're the guy who sits slouched in the back row of Philosophy 101, tossing out little troublemaking comments, just trying to screw things up, keep anything from getting done. They're not interested in the actual work, in the rigor of what's being discussed. They just want to be wise asses and create trouble. Everybody who went to college had to take Philosophy 101. You all know what I'm talking about. That guy in the back row, not interested in learning, not interested in contributing, only interested in being a dickwad. That's the Republican Party. They're the guy in the back row. That's today's Republican Party. They're the douchebag in the back row. They got nothing to contribute. Fine. Sit there. Do your worst. All you can do is just whine and complain, bitch and moan. And God bless Joe for figuring that out. Good for you, Joe. The coronavirus stimulus package had, I don't know what the last count was, 70+% approval. The infrastructure bill, the American Jobs Plan, has similar numbers. So if you're talking bipartisanship, I'm not the first person to say this, and I won't be the last, but it bears repeating. Joe promised bipartisanship, and in a very real way, he's absolutely delivering, because these big programs that he's fighting for have bipartisan agreement. And the two big ones, of course, being COVID and now the jobs plan. You could toss in the election reform legislation that passed the House and is sitting in the Senate right now. That also has bipartisan support in the country. A great majority, up in the 80s or 90s, this overwhelming majority of Democrats and a substantial majority of Republicans, self-described Republicans. I'm talking about United States citizens now, talking about people. They favored the COVID Act by large numbers. They favor the Election Reform Act. I don't know what the numbers on there, but I know it's a majority. I know for sure it's a majority. And again, in large numbers, they favor this jobs program. So he promised bipartisanship, and he is absolutely delivering. The fact that a couple of hundred individuals, mostly old white men, in the House and the Senate with R's next to their names, can't get on board, doesn't mean these things are not bipartisan. This very weird phenomenon of hardcore right-wing extremists who populate the Republican caucuses of the House and the Senate. They don't even reflect their own constituents anymore. But the fact that the Democrats are being influenced by their left wing, the fact that Joe Biden is making good on his FDR promises, you got to be pretty happy about this. Now, there are fights to be had. There's hard work to be done. Yes, of course. There's no time to dance in the streets. There's hard work to be done. There's the right wing of the Democratic Party, personified by Sinema and Manchin. There are the limits still. Legislative limits, especially in the Senate regarding filibuster and reconciliation. So sure, there's lots of work to do. But with each small success along the way, you got to take that as an inspiration for the next steps required. It's like when you have success in your own personal goals, eating right or getting exercise. With each small success you have, it's an inspiration for that next bigger success. And that's where we are right now with the Democrats. I am a devoted lefty, but I'm not going to be so dogmatic as to not recognize the positive steps happening right now. Now, there have been some very critical voices, and rightfully so, regarding the climate crisis aspect of this current plan, the jobs/infrastructure plan. And I'll just say this. Yes, absolutely, the current proposals are completely inadequate. Yes, I would agree. I'm also going to acknowledge Joe Biden when he says this is a down payment for the fight on climate crisis. This bill was never designed to be an all-encompassing climate bill. Now, having said that, there are things to be critical about. It's still rather industry-friendly, this infrastructure plan. It still relies on, and I want to give credit here, I'm looking at an article from Common Dreams by Jake Johnson, staff writer. It relies on so-called gimmicky subsidies for carbon capture. Brett Hartle of the Center for Biological Diversity says it fantastically wishes the free market will save us and fails to take crucial and ambitious steps toward phasing out fossil fuels. Yes, this is all true. And I'm not sure we're ever going to get what we need from Joe. We're certainly not going to get it in this particular legislation. It has modest funding. It has modest goals. It incorporates private industry. So in this bit of criticism, I'm absolutely going to add my voice. We keep hearing the words big and bold, and Joe claims he's going bigger and bolder. And to a great extent, he is. On the climate side of this whole initiative, he is not. If you put it in the frame of an opening bid, just this sort of opening salvo in the fight, I suppose if you want to be generous about it, you could say, okay, it's just an opening shot. But it's something we have to be very aware of. This thing doesn't even come close. And then I'll close with this, just a kind of an overarching criticism of all of it. Biden's entire agenda, his entire presidency. And really, it's a criticism of the entire U.S. government. Every single proposal is always going to be based on this underlying acceptance, understanding that growth is at the heart of everything we do. Every single proposal out there relies on the underlying default assumption that growth is good. We want to grow more. We want to continue to grow. GDP has to grow. Employment has to grow. We have to have more jobs, more economic activity, more production, more. Now, here's where we get into a large philosophical disagreement I have with the entire American establishment. There's just a handful of us who understand and are trying to promote negative growth, fewer jobs, less activity. It's really the only way that we achieve economic and environmental justice for both humans and non-humans on the planet. So even when I'm applauding Joe and his big, bold initiatives, let it be clear that they are still fundamentally, at their very core, fatally flawed, because they both accept and encourage infinite growth. And until we tackle that suicidal assumption, we are still ultimately heading in the wrong direction. I believe I can hold these two contradictory views, that the so-called big, bold initiatives of the current administration will improve lives. They will at least slow down this deadly course we're on, but ultimately they will not reverse the deadly course. As long as growth is baked in to these large initiatives, we're still heading in the wrong direction ultimately. Yes, it's good that we're putting on the brakes. Yes, it's good that we're prioritizing the earth and its people rather than prioritizing only and exclusively profit of a very select few. So yes, it's better. Yes, I applaud it. But let's keep our eyes on the prize. Negative growth, less consumption, less production, less activity. That's the only way we're really ultimately going to save ourselves and the planet. Maybe I'm straining a little too much to try to reconcile all this. I don't know. Maybe I am. I'll give it some thought and get back to you. All right, let's call it a day. Hang in there. Keep up the good fight. I love you. I'm Charles Purcell.